Well, good afternoon, and thanks for joining us this afternoon for a special announcement. I'm going to introduce my brother Jim in a minute, but he's spent the better part of the last 2 years, I think, working on this project, and been all around the country interviewing people, and some great stories from my dad's time in Ireland as well. So I think it's an interesting story, and I don't know if I had the final copy to read, but I read a copy of the book, and so I think you did a great job, and it's my pleasure to introduce Jim.
Thanks, Art. I really appreciate all of your support throughout this process. I appreciate you giving us the room today, and I appreciate everyone in the Steelers. There's been a lot of work from a lot of people throughout the Steelers, so I appreciate everything that those folks have done. I appreciate everyone who's come here today. Thanks for taking the time to stick around after. As Art said, we have a book out, and it is called A Different Way to Win, Dan Rooney's Story from the Super Bowl to the Rooney Rule. It is, the way we're talking about it is part business bio, part memoir, and part history. It is, Joe Green did the foreword on the book, so we're really glad of Joe's contribution, and it was great to work with him on that piece of it. And the book is available for pre-order on Amazon as well as on Steelers.com. In terms of, sort of why do I think this story is important, I guess I would first say I think my father was probably sick of us, and particularly me, continuing to talk about him. And I also want to acknowledge, look, I understand my father wasn't perfect. I don't want to take that position. But I do think his story is important, is an important story to get out there, particularly in light of the idea that we live in this world where there's so much drive towards instant gratification and quick fixes, things like that. My father really, what I saw him do was really take on some big initiatives and stick with them for a very long time. If you look at the work with NFL labor, if you look at his work in Ireland, if you look at the Rooney Rule, all of those things took years, and in some cases decades, where he was involved with them. And his impact and where he really was effective was sort of playing that long game and making sure he stuck with things in that way. And that was what I really saw as that was different about him. In terms of a little bit of how we got here, as Art said, I've been involved with the project for about 2.5 years. And about a year ago, Art saw a version, and it was about 700 pages long. And he said, that's a little too long. So we brought in some partners, and they have been fantastic. So Judy Batista, who many of you know from NFL Network, has been a collaborator. Terry Galway is with Politico, and Terry has done 15 different books on the Irish in America, and just a privilege to work with Terry. And then Jeremy DeRue. Jeremy is the outside counsel for the Fritz Pollard Alliance. Anyone that doesn't know the Fritz Pollard Alliance, they are the minority advocacy group, the advocacy group for minority employees throughout the NFL, and having Jeremy's perspective, I think, really helped enhance the project. I think I talked to over 50 people, and I spent several days with Commissioner Tagliabue. I spent several hours with Commissioner Goodell, family members, players, folks who'd been in the White House, the State Department, and then especially in Ireland. I guess the one story of an interview that and there were so many that meant so much, but one that I'd like to talk about is a woman named Patricia Hume. So Patricia is the wife of John Hume. John Hume won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1998 for his work in Ireland. And so we had this 2-hour conversation, and Patricia started in tears about halfway through, and then I'm in tears. And she's talking about all the things that my father did, and my mother too, in going to Derry. Derry is a town that was probably hardest hit, or generally seen as the hardest hit place during the Troubles. And President Clinton visited Derry, and Tip O'Neill visited Derry, and she certainly appreciated those big visits. But she sort of told the story that I'm talking about, that over a 25-year period, my father and my parents were up there and making this commitment and this contribution to this place that was just so hard hit. So, that was that to me was a really good example of his life and a really meaningful moment to hear it from someone who was impacted so directly. In terms of the narrative of the book, there's 4 main narratives. We talk about my father's work in the NFL, and we talk about the Steelers of the 70s and sort of how he transformed the organization along with the great management team that he had there. We talk about this work in Ireland and this personal dimension of peace that he had. And then we talk about the Rooney Rule, and we talk about the pathway to the Rooney Rule and how he played such a critical role in helping bring it about. We talk about sort of the final 15 years of his life as being the chief advocate for the rule. And then we talk about how the rule has gone beyond, and it's used beyond football, and now it's actually used by corporations internationally. So that's sort of the high-level basis of the story. Again, I think what I wanted to get across and what I saw him do was, always sort of step into certain challenges and stay with them for such a long period of time, and that's what I thought, was different about the way he approached leadership. The book, again, is called A Different Way to Win, Dan Rooney's story from the Super Bowl to the Rooney Rule, and it is available for pre-order at Amazon and at Steelers.com. So any questions you might have, I'm happy to take any questions that folks have.
Jim, when you talk to other people about your dad, aside from just his commitment, but his selfless commitment, was basically, I'm going to assume, was for the betterment of the league, always looking at the league, at the betterment of the league as a whole.
Yes, and I think that when you look at the league, when you looked at Ireland, all of these cases, he had this statement that people talk about, do the right thing, and what he meant by that, and what everyone reflected that I spoke to would say when he would say that is, it wasn't about getting more money or getting more recognition. It was, do you feel good about the decision you made because it impacted the community or the organization you were involved in a positive way? So, yeah, I think that's fundamentally what he was all about, and we try to put a whole bunch of stories in the book that exemplify that.
Jim, were there any situations where you were sitting down with somebody and you learned things about your father that you didn't know?
So that's such a good question. I don't. There were certainly some technical things about the Rooney Rule and the process in the Rooney Rule that I learned about. It wasn't, my experience wasn't as much about new information. There certainly was some, but I did so many of the interviews right after he passed away, and I gave the example of Patricia Hume going into tears, but it was almost this reflection, maybe even a little bit of grieving that I got to have with so many people that were important in his life, and to share those experiences. And we've tried to convey that feeling, that experience in the book, because, I was really touched by the way people were sharing with me, and it felt very authentic. It didn't feel like they were just doing it because of his passing, but that there really was this deep emotional connection. So that really was the biggest experience I had, taken away from the interviews. I mean, certainly there was a lot of information and good stories and things that helped bring the project, about. But the emotional experience was really important to me. Yes.
What would he think about this book?
What would he think about this book? Well, he would say he wrote his own book. Anyone who knows him knows that would be his first thing. But what's in this book that wasn't in that book is, we go into, as I said, a lot of detail about the Rooney Rule. We talk a fair amount about his time as ambassador, which is a really interesting experience. We focus solely on sort of when he was in Ireland, and in about 2.5, 3 years, you get so many of the same examples that you get over 70 years of the rest of his career, that he went over there, and the folks that he worked with at Embassy Dublin just talk about how he transformed their experience working in an embassy, and that it was, several of them have told me it was by far and away their best time as career diplomats working with and for him. So I think that those stories were ones that he would be glad are out there and want people to hear.
Jim, Dan did so many amazing things in so many different fields, obviously touched a lot of different lives. Is there a single takeaway that you want readers to have after they've read this book and learned about this man? Is there a single thing that perhaps you can say about Dan Rooney that you want people to know?
Right. I've tried to explain it, but I really hope that I think what he did and what I hope comes across is this idea that you can be strong, you can be principled, you can set really high standards, and you can also have this commitment to humanity. You can be decent and kind while you're being successful. And I think that's really what I saw him do over and over again, and that's the experiences that were reflected back to me.
What do you think Dan's work in the NFL today would focus on?
That's a great question. I mean, I think my brother Art is doing a lot of the things that my father thought were important. He's on the diversity committee. He's on the labor committee. I think those were two places that my father thought were really, really important. The other place that he would be working is, saying let's not get so caught up in money. Let's make sure the fans are having a good experience. Let's make sure that the game is being played with the highest level of integrity, as he always did. Those were his two big focuses that he had throughout, and as the league grows, I think he would want to make sure that focus was maintained.
Anyone else?
Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate it.